Okay, in our next lesson, find the quotient. Now, quotient means divide, but you're never actually going to divide here. Okay, find the quotient is a little bit confusing. Okay, here's what you need to do. You need to eradicate the I out of the denominator. Okay, that's what find the quotient from a complex number is. Okay, it's called rationalizing the denominator. Okay, you don't want an I in the denominator. Now here's how you execute this. You put times, and you're going to times by another fraction. Now you got a plus. You're going to put, if you have a plus, please circle it, and if you have a plus, put it in parentheses. So that's two terms. There's no plus here, so that's one term. One term. You need to count the terms. Now it's all about the bottom. If you just have one term, which you do, okay, you have just one term, you just multiply by I, okay? And if you want to put a 1, do it, okay? 1I, 1I. So that's one term, and that's one term. Now, here's what I do. I make a new fraction. I will multiply into 1. So anytime there's one term on the bottom, that means there's no plus, there's no minus, just a number in I. One term, you just multiply by I. I would put a 1 there to see what you're doing. Okay, then I come over here, and I'm going to find the top first. So 2 terms by 1 term. What's 2 times 1? I think it's 2, so that'd be 2 products. So you take your 5, and you're going to times it to 1I. Then you go to your 3I and times it by 1I. So this here is 5I, okay? And this here is 3I to the second. So the 5I is simplified, but I to the second holds that -1 value, and 3 times -1 is -3, okay? So, -3 plus 5I. You usually put the number without the I first. Now we're going to figure out our bottom. Now that's one term, that's one term, so that's just one product we have to find. So 7I, 1I. So that's 7I to the second, but again, I to the second holds that special value of -1, which gives us -7. So now I is out of the denominator. Now again, the reason you're multiplying it, because when you multiply by the same thing, anything over itself simplifies to 1. So I'm really just taking this times a value of 1. I'm just expressing it differently. Okay, next problem. Plus negative that, so that is split up into 2 terms. There's no plus there, so that's 1 term. So again, the 2 terms, if you got more than 1 term, you want to put it in parentheses, okay? So again, 1 term on the bottom means we just multiply by I. I like to put 1s in front. And then my whole object is to make the bottom so it does not contain I. So that's 1 term, so that's 2 terms by 1 term. So 8 times 1I. And then -6I times 1I. So that's 8I, and that's -6I to the second. So that's simplified, but that's -1. So -6 times -1 is 6, okay? So we write that as 6 plus 8I. Now on the bottom, you got 1 term by 1 term, okay? So that's just one product we have to figure out. So 3I times 1I. 2 by 1 would be 1. So that's 3I to the second, but again, that'd be 3 times -1, which is -3. And there it is, okay? Actually, one thing you do have to look out for, I didn't explain. You look at a multiplication table, 3, 5, and 7. You actually reduce those, all 3 of them, but they're all in the first row, so don't do it. And that's the same with these. These are all together in the first row. Now, if they're all together in the second row, I'd divide every single one of them by 2, but they're not. Okay, next one. There's a plus, so that's 2 terms on top. And here on the bottom, that's just 1 term. So if I have 1 term on the bottom, I just times it by 1I, okay? So that would be taking two terms by one term, so that's two products to find. We take 8 times 1i, and we take 7i times 1i. So 8 times 1i is 8i, okay? 7i times 1i is 7i to the second. Now I to the second is negative 1. 7 times negative 1 is negative 7, okay? So you put negative 7 plus 8i, okay? Then the bottom, one term, so it's just a one term by one term. So 2i times 1i, that's 2i to the second, but that's really 2 times negative 1, and that's negative 2. Okay, 7, 8, and 2 are just in the first row, so that's simplified. Okay. Okay, the plus is there, that's two terms, put it in parentheses, but there's no plus here, that's just one single term. Okay, so two terms. There's only one term on bottom. You look at the bottom, okay? So I put 1 so you can see what the coefficient is. So we got to find our top. So that's taking two terms times one term. So it's 2 by 1. So 6 times 1i, and then 7i times 1i. So it's 6i. That's a product. That's 7i to the second. That's not your final product because I to the second is negative 1, so it's negative 7. So you have negative 7 plus 6i. Okay, now in the denominator, okay, we know that's one term, and that's one term as well. There's no pluses and minuses within the expression, so it's just 1 by 1, so that's just one product to find on the bottom. So negative 5i, 1i. It's negative 5i to the second. Now, I to the second holds that value of negative 1, which gets rid of the I, and that ends up as 5. Okay, so 5 is my product on the bottom. And all those can be in this only row 1. Okay, that's kind of the first category of problems. Now here's the second. Because all of those had just one term on the bottom, which made me, I'm able to just multiply by I, or 1i. But now the game has changed. There's a plus, that's two terms on top, just like they have been, but we have two terms on the bottom. That's a game changer. When there are two terms on the bottom, which there are, you look at your bottom, you're going to multiply by this same parentheses, but you're going to switch the plus to a minus, okay? So it's going to be 8 minus 7i, and then the top has to be equivalent, okay? Now, these are a pain in the butt, they're just long. Because now that minus makes it plus negative, okay? And now I have two terms by two terms on the top. So that's the FOIL, okay? Two terms by two terms means there's four terms to find. Four products to find, excuse me. So 3 times 8. 3 times negative 7i, then 2i times the same two things, 8, negative 7i. Now that's 24, that's a simplified product. That's negative 21i, and that's a simplified product. That's positive 16i, that's simplified. That's negative 14i to the second. But I to the second is negative 1, so negative 14 times negative 1 is 14. Now our top can be calculated. Okay, we combine our i's, 24 and 14, non-i's, 24 and 14 make 38. Then we combine our i's, negative 21 and 16, which is negative 5i. You can put 38 minus 5i. That's the simplified top. Now the bottom, you got two terms by two terms, okay? And this is called conjugates, when you have the same expression in the parentheses, but one's positive, one's negative. Those are called, it's called the conjugate rule of multiplication. Okay, so I go 8 times 8 8 times negative 7i. Okay, then 7i times 8. And then 7i times negative 7i. So 64, 8 times negative 7 is negative 56i, positive 56i, and 7 times negative 7 is negative 49i to the second, but we know that that holds a value of negative 1, so it's negative 49 times negative 1, which is 49. So I got 64, negative 56, positive 56, and 49. Now, here's why this is done. Because remember, we want to get I out of the bottom. Well, that's going to happen because when I add my i's, okay, or I'll add my non-i's first, 64 and 49, okay? 113. And then I'll add my i's, but it's 0, okay? That's why you did that, because now the i's will go away. So 13. Okay, next problem. Okay, there's no plus, there's no minus on top, so that's one term. On bottom, okay, that's two terms. Now there's two terms on the bottom, so we need to multiply by two terms, okay? When there's two terms, we don't just go 1i. That's not going to work, okay? That's what you do when there's one term on the bottom. When there's two terms, you switch the plus to a minus and put the same things, okay? And same thing there. Okay, so let's figure out our top. Okay, so there's one term here. Minus is a plus negative, so that's two terms here. Okay, put that in parentheses when there's more than one. So that's one term by two terms. So that's two products we find. 1 times 2 is 2. So you got negative 2i times 1, and then back to the negative 2i times negative 1i. So negative 2 times 1 is negative 2i. Then negative 2 times negative 1 is 2i to the second. But we know you can circle that product, but i to the second holds that special value negative 1. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. Okay. All right, so we found our top. It'd be negative 2 plus negative 2i. Now we got to find our bottom product. That's two terms, so I put a parentheses, and that's also two terms, so I put a parentheses. So that's two terms by two terms, okay? So that's the FOIL. So that's four products to find. So 1 times 1, or no, 1, sorry. Then 1 times negative 1i, then 1i times 1, and 1i times negative 1i. So 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times negative 1i is negative 1i. 1 times 1 is 1i. 1 times negative 1 is negative 1i to the second. Okay? And we know I to the second is a negative 1. So it's negative 1 times negative 1, which is 1. So I got 1, negative 1i, positive 1i, and this ended up as 1. So those are my four products. Okay, so the non-i's, 1 plus 1 makes 2. And then with the i's, negative 1 and positive 1 make 0. Okay, so I don't put anything. Now, if you circle that, that's fine. You can actually divide those all by 2. So it'd be 1, 1, 1. So it'd be negative 1 plus negative 1i, and then if you have a 1 on the bottom, usually they don't put that. Now, if you don't want to do that, that's fine. Just get me there, and I'm happy. Be a happy man. Okay, the next problem. On top, we have 2 plus 3i. That's a 3i. 2 plus 3i. On bottom, we have 1 minus 4i. So it'd be a plus negative. So we got two terms here. But more importantly, on bottom, we also have two terms. So it's all about the bottom. So when I have two terms on bottom, I don't just multiply by 1i. That's what I do if there's one term. With two terms, instead of a minus, we're going to have plus. Okay. because it was a minus. I made it plus negative probably a little bit too early, okay? But again, a minus or a plus separates it into two terms. It was a minus, so I go plus over here and write the same things, okay? And then up here, the same thing that's down here. Remember, you got to multiply by the same thing. So that's two terms by two terms, okay? So that's the FOIL, four products to find. So 2 times 1, 2 times 4i, then 3i times 1, and 3i times 4i. So it's 2, 8i, and these are products are in simplest form here, 3i. 12i to the second is not, okay? That's 12 times negative 1, which is negative 12. Okay, then you combine your numbers without 2 plus negative 12. That's 2 plus negative 12 is negative 10. So again, we add the non-i's, then add the i's. 8 plus 3 is 11. It's just 11i. I to the second is not, that's not an addition thing. That's a multiplication thing. I'm adding when I figure these out. Okay, and then the bottom one's also two terms by two terms. So we take 1 times 1, 1 times 4i. Basically, you got to FOIL your you-know-what off here when you're dealing with two terms on the bottom. Negative 4i times 1, and then negative 4i times 4i. So that's 1, it's 4i, negative 4i, and then negative 16i to the second, okay? So again, the I to the second is negative 1 and 16, okay? So these are the products, 1, 4i, negative 4i, and 16, okay? So I combine my non-i's, 1 and 16, that makes 17. But when I combine my i's, they drop out. Okay, that's why you have one as a positive, one as a negative, one as a positive, because those are always guaranteed to drop out. Okay, all right, the last problem. You got a minus in between those, okay, so that's two terms. A plus in between those, that's two terms. So two terms, two terms. But I only look at the bottom when I'm looking what to multiply by. It's all about the bottom. Remember, when it's just one term, you multiply by one I. With two terms, you switch the sign to opposite, then 3 and 4i. Okay? So that's two terms, and so is that. That's two terms, and so is that. So they're both FOILs, okay? 2 by 2, that's 4 products to find to figure out the top. 2 by 2, it's going to be 4 products to find on the bottom. Okay, so start with your 5 times 3, then 5 times negative 4i. Then I go to negative 2i and multiply it by the same two things. So find the products. 5 times 3i is 15. 5 times negative 4i is negative 20i. Negative 2i times 3 is negative 6i. Negative 2 times negative 4 is 8i to the second. So the I to the second, these first three are in simplest form, but that one's not, because that's 8 times negative 1. That's negative 8. Okay, so I combine my numbers. 15 plus negative 8. That's 7. Then the i's, negative 20, negative 6, that'd be negative 26i. Remember, you can have I on the top, you're just trying to get it out of the bottom. Okay, then 3 times 3, and then 3 times negative 4i. Then 4i times 3, and then 4i times negative 4i. 3 times 3 is 9, negative 12i, positive 12i, then negative 16i to the second. Well, I to the second is negative 1. That first three products are simplified, but the next one's not. So negative 16 times negative 1, and that's 16. Okay. So 9 plus 16 is 25. But then the i's cancel, okay? Because negative 12 plus 12 is 0. All right, don't worry about trying to reduce them. I'm fine if you don't do that.